Alexander Sinclair stood on the marble balcony of his penthouse, gazing down at the city that seemed to bow at his feet. At 25, he commanded an empire worth $12 billion, inherited from generations of old money and multiplied through his ruthless business acumen. His Armani suits were tailored in Milan, his watches cost more than most people's homes, and his garage housed a collection of supercars that would make collectors weep with envy. But success had turned Alexander's heart to stone. He fired employees on a whim, crushed small businesses without a second thought, and treated people like disposable assets in his grand game of wealth accumulation. His penthouse was a monument to excess: crystal chandeliers from Austria, artwork worth millions adorning the walls, and Persian rugs that had taken artisans years to weave. Yet for all its beauty, it felt as cold as a mausoleum. "Mr. Sinclair," his assistant Maria called from behind him, her voice barely above a whisper. She had learned to speak softly around him, having witnessed his explosive temper too many times. "Your Bugatti is ready. The charity gala awaits." Alexander scoffed. The charity gala was nothing more than a networking opportunity, a place where the wealthy gathered to write tax-deductible checks and pat themselves on the back. He adjusted his diamond cufflinks and strode toward the elevator, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble with the rhythm of someone who had never known uncertainty. The Bugatti Chiron purred through the city streets like a mechanical panther, its engine singing a symphony of power and precision. Alexander loved the feeling of control, the way other drivers moved aside as he passed, the envious stares from pedestrians. He was untouchable, unstoppable, or so he believed. The rain had begun falling earlier that evening, turning the asphalt into a mirror that reflected the neon lights of the city. Alexander was speeding through downtown when he saw her, a small girl, no more than 7, chasing a paper airplane that had escaped her grasp. She darted into the street, her bright yellow raincoat a flash of sunshine against the gray evening. Time seemed to slow as Alexander slammed on the brakes, the car's advanced systems screaming in protest. But physics is indifferent to wealth, and the laws of momentum care nothing for bank accounts. The last thing Alexander remembered was the terrible sound of impact and the sight of a broken yellow raincoat lying still on the wet pavement. Alexander awakened to the steady beeping of machines and the antiseptic smell of a hospital. His head felt like it was filled with cotton, and when he tried to speak, his voice came out as barely a whisper. A nurse appeared at his bedside, not the private room he expected, not the luxury medical suite his money usually bought, but a simple hospital bed in what appeared to be a shared ward. Where am I?" he managed to croak. The nurse, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands, smiled gently. "You're in St. Mary's Public Hospital, honey. You've been in a coma for 3 weeks. We weren't sure you'd make it." 3 weeks? Panic began to set in. "My company, ... my meetings." "And the girl, is she?" The nurse's expression grew somber. "The little girl is alive, but she's paralyzed from the waist down. Her name is Sofia Martinez. Her family, well, they can't afford the medical bills." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. He tried to sit up, to reach for his phone, to contact his lawyers, but his body wouldn't obey. That's when the doctor entered with news that would shatter his world completely. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm Dr. Patricia Williams. You've suffered severe spinal injuries. While you'll regain most of your mobility with extensive therapy, you'll be in a wheelchair for the next several months, possibly longer." The months that followed were a masterclass in humility. Alexander's assets had been frozen pending legal investigations into the accident. His fair-weather friends disappeared like smoke. His business partners circled like vultures, and his penthouse felt like a prison of memories. For the first time in his life, Alexander experienced what the rest of humanity knew all too well: vulnerability, limitation, and dependence on others. It was Maria, his long-suffering assistant, who became his anchor. She had stayed by his side when everyone else abandoned ship, helping him navigate the basics of daily life from a wheelchair. She arranged for his physical therapy at St. Mary's. Not because it was the best facility, but because it was what his reduced circumstances could afford. It was there, in the rehabilitation wing, that Alexander met Sophia Martinez. Sophia was in the bed next to his during therapy sessions, her legs motionless beneath white hospital sheets. But her spirit was anything but broken. She greeted each day with a smile that could light up the darkest room, drawing pictures with crayons worn down to nubs, and sharing stories about her dreams of becoming a teacher someday. "Why aren't you angry at me?" Alexander asked one day, the question that had been burning in his heart for weeks. Sophia looked up from her coloring book, her dark eyes wise beyond her 7 years. "My mama says that accidents happen, and that being angry just makes your heart sick. She says the most important thing is that we're both alive." Her mother, Alina Martinez, cleaned offices at night to pay for Sophia's medical bills. She would arrive at the hospital after her shift, exhausted but always carrying homemade soup for Sophia, and, surprisingly, enough for Alexander too. When he protested that he didn't deserve her kindness, Alina simply said, "Everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're suffering." As weeks turned to months, Alexander found himself looking forward to his therapy sessions, not for his recovery, but for the chance to spend time with Sophia. She taught him to see the world through different eyes, to find wonder in small things, to appreciate the simple gift of human connection, to understand that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the love we share with others. One evening, as Alexander struggled with a particularly difficult physical therapy exercise, Sophia wheeled her chair over to him. "You know what I do when things get really hard?" She whispered conspiratorially. "What?" "I pretend I'm a superhero. And superheroes never give up, even when it hurts." She flexed her tiny arms in a show of strength that made Alexander smile for the first time in months. That night, Alexander made a decision that would change everything. He called his lawyers and instructed them to liquidate enough assets to establish a fund for Sophia's medical care and education. But that was just the beginning. As Alexander's physical strength slowly returned, so did his capacity for empathy. He began volunteering at the hospital during his recovery, reading to children in the pediatric ward, helping elderly patients with their meals, and discovering that the act of giving was far more fulfilling than anything his billions had ever bought him. He started small, paying for a single mother's medical bills here, covering a family's rent there. But as his legal troubles were resolved and his assets were unfrozen, Alexander began to dream bigger. What if his wealth could be a force for good? What if his second chance could become countless second chances for others? Sophia became his inspiration and unofficial advisor. Every major decision passed through the filter of a simple question: what would Sophia do? 2 years after the accident, Alexander stood at the podium of the Sinclair Foundation's inaugural gala. The foundation, funded by the majority of his wealth, was dedicated to providing medical care for underprivileged children and supporting families affected by accidents and disabilities. In the front row sat Sophia, now 9 years old and walking with the help of braces and crutches, the result of an experimental surgery the foundation had funded. Her mother Alina sat beside her, no longer cleaning offices, but serving as the foundation's community outreach director. 2 years ago, Alexander began, his voice strong and clear. "I thought I was the richest man in the world. I had billions of dollars, dozens of properties, and more luxury than I could ever use. But I was actually the poorest person you could imagine, because I had forgotten the most important truth. We are only as wealthy as the love we give and the lives we touch." He looked directly at Sophia, who beamed up at him with pride. "A little girl in a yellow raincoat taught me that true wealth isn't about what we accumulate, but about what we contribute. It's not about building walls of gold around ourselves, but about building bridges of compassion to others." 5 years after the accident that changed his life, Alexander Sinclair stood in the garden of the new children's hospital the foundation had built. It was named the Sophia Martinez Center for Hope and Healing, And it was everything his old penthouse was not. Warm, welcoming, and filled with the laughter of children and the tears of grateful families. Sophia, now 11 and walking without assistance thanks to continued medical advances, ran up to him with a drawing she had made in art therapy. It showed two stick figures, one tall, one small, both with huge smiles and their arms outstretched toward the sun. "It's us," she said simply. "Best friends forever." Alexander knelt down to her level, this child who had saved his soul without even trying, and realized that he was finally, truly, the richest man in the world. Sometimes it takes losing everything to find what matters most. Sometimes it takes breaking completely to be rebuilt as something better. And sometimes it takes the pure heart of a child to remind us that the greatest fortune we can ever possess is the love we share with others. Alexander had learned the most valuable lesson of all. When gold turns to grace, when wealth becomes wisdom, and when a billionaire boy learns to see through the eyes of love, that's when miracles happen, one act of kindness at a time. Like and subscribe for more videos.